Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD. I wasn't here last week, so I hope to see that. I hope we have a good turnout. Usually we do the week after I haven't been doing the webinar. Tonight, I see a lot of new faces, and I'm glad to see those. I also see some familiar ones, too. So for those of you that are coming back again, welcome. I'm glad to see you again. For those of you that are new to these webinars, you create them with your questions. And the way you do that is you write your questions to me, and I post them during the course of the webinar so that everyone can see them. There's a chat box over on the right-hand side of the screen, and you write your questions to me through that chat box. I ask that you do not hit the enter key until your whole question is complete, and then hit the enter key, and that will send the question to me. The reason I ask that you don't hit that enter key is if you do, it creates multiple questions on my end, and it can get to be hard to kind of follow and post that question for everyone else to see as well, too. I am doing a recording of the webinar tonight, as I usually do, and if everything goes as planned tonight, I will edit it later this evening or early tomorrow morning and get it posted up at our main website, the treatlyme.net site. As I said, that's if everything goes as planned. Sometimes there are some technical difficulties. Tomorrow morning, you'll get an email from me. And in that email, it will include the link to the recording. Also, it'll include the link to sign up for next week's webinar, too. So this is the beginning of the April series. And we'll do tonight's webinar, and then I've got two scheduled for the next, the 2 weeks after tonight as well, too. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, one more thing. I will read the question to you, even though those of you that are live in the webinar tonight can see it. For those that are watching the recorded version or listening to the podcast version of this, you won't be able to see that question, obviously. In the recorded version, it doesn't show up. So the reason I read those questions is so that people can follow along with what's going on as well, too. And I'll answer the questions to the best of my ability. There's some things that you all ask me that I'm not familiar with or I haven't heard of before. And sometimes with those questions, I learn new things to look into as well, too. All right. So let's go ahead and get started here. I'm going to go ahead and post up the first question. Actually, I got to get myself to the part I see it there. All right, here we are. Hello, Brenda. Let's see. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for these webinars. You're welcome. Are there any antibiotics besides doxycycline, minocycline, Biaxin, and azithromycin that are combined with amoxicillin and probenecid? Have Lyme and Bartonella, no luck with the Cowden drops. Okay, so to answer your question, yeah, there are some other things that you can combine with it. If you are looking, so first of all, I have to consider antibiotics that will treat both Lyme and Bartonella because obviously, or we have to cover for both Lyme and Bartonella based on what you said, okay? So amoxicillin treats Lyme only, and it treats the spirochete form of the Lyme. For those of you that are not familiar, Lyme exists in you in 3 separate forms. There is a spirochete, that's the thing that looks like a corkscrew. There also is a form of Lyme that lives inside of the cells. We call that the L form of Lyme, or it's also known as intracellular Lyme. And there's also a microscopic cyst form of the germ too, all right? So when we treat Lyme, we have to design treatments that will treat all 3 forms, all right? When it comes to Bartonella, what I have found is that it usually takes about 2 antibiotics used together to have the most effective treatments, because Bartonella can be hard to treat when you have Lyme in the picture, okay? And so I often like to use 2 antibiotics. If I use 2 antibiotics to treat Bartonella, I find effectiveness about 80 to 85% of the time. So sometimes you can use the same 2 antibiotics for Bartonella that you do for Lyme, but not all the time, all right? So if I look at your treatment, the amoxicillin treats, again, just spirochete Lyme. And one way that you can turn this into a Bartonella treatment as well would be to add rifampin. Rifampin is an old tuberculosis medicine. It's a 300 milligram pill, and it's 2 pills 1 time a day. I want to warn you, it turns your urine orange, okay? That's what happens to be a side effect of it. And it is useful for treating intracellular Lyme and cyst Lyme. So if you combine it with the amoxicillin, you're actually treating all 3 forms of the Lyme germ. And by itself, it's a pretty good agent to treat Bartonella, but you do better adding a second antibiotic to it, all right? And the problem is the second antibiotic that I will often add is either going to be a minocycline, Biaxin, or azithromycin. So obviously you're not going to do those, okay? But if you want to add a second antibiotic to it, the other option you would have is to add something called Bactrim, which is an old sulfa antibiotic and often used for treating bladder infections. It's one of the common reasons that we use it. But if you combine Bactrim along with rifampin, you have a very strong Bartonella treatment as well too, okay? So that might be some ways to go ahead and look at doing this, all right? The other option is to totally just separate out how you treat Bartonella from how you treat Lyme. And so in terms of your current antibiotic regimen that has just amoxicillin, another way that you could make it into a full Lyme germ treatment would be to add either metronidazole or tinidazole to the mix. Those treat the cyst and intracellular Lyme, but they'll do nothing for Bartonella. And if you were to do that, then I would also consider using Bactrim, maybe just by itself. It'll work maybe about 80% of the time. And that, again, would be one pill twice a day on that, okay? So there, as you can tell, there's a lot of moving parts to consider here. If you want to see options that you have, there's a couple of articles that you should take a look at from within the Treat Lyme book. I'm going to go ahead and just do a quick screen share. So this is the Treat Lyme book, everyone. This is at my website, the www.treatlyme.net, Treat Lyme and Associated Diseases. And I've divided the Treat Lyme book into various chapters, which you can find by clicking on the table of contents here. If you were to look in the chapter called Infection Treatment Plans, you'll find that I have written an article about how to treat most things, like viruses, for instance, like Bartonella. And in here, you're going to see, I'll just do a quick look at this. So the Bartonella article I updated in November, okay? So it's as current as I can be. And I basically have added a section in here that talked about some herbs you can use as well too. But anyhow, I break my treatments down into 3 tiers. There's tier 1. These are treatments that work about maybe up to 90% of the time. Tier 2 treatments, these work about 80% of the time. And then tier 3 would be basically herbs only. They work about 70% of the time. Okay, so that gives you an idea. That's how you can learn more about ways to treat Bartonella. There is also in the Infection Treatment Plans chapter article on how to kill your Lyme germs. And that's called Kills Lyme Germs, a Brief Antibiotic Guide. And take a look in here. I talk about the need to treat all 3 forms of the Lyme germ. And I lay out various options that you can use to treat the germs. I even talk about the various forms of antibiotics and what they do. And then I give you some sample treatment plans too, all right? Now, one thing I want to point out about treating both Lyme and Bartonella that is critical, and that is that you follow the steps that I've added into what is called the Successful Treatment Recipe, my Lyme disease treatment guideline, because those steps are all designed to boost the immune system, okay? So this last thing around here, I say recovering from Lyme requires more than antibiotics, okay? It's critical for your recovery that you do all kinds of things to support the body, boost the immune system, correct hormonal imbalances, all right? So if you're wondering what the Successful Treatment Recipe is, take a look here on the Lyme Guidelines tab. All right, and I'll let you look through this later. I might even look at it later tonight with you too, but follow the essential steps. It calls for things like sleep, diet, correcting hormones, etc. You've got to do all those things in addition to poisoning your germs with antibiotics. So don't forget to do all those other critical steps that I outline in my Lyme disease treatment guideline. All right? All right. Thanks for that question, Brenda. All right, let's get rid of that. Hello, Ben. Let's see. Thank you, Dr. Ross, for your time. You're welcome. Let's see. I read so often about chlamydia pneumoniae, everyone stands for pneumonia, and mycoplasma being as common as Babesia and Bart in regards to co-infections. How does one differentiate symptoms of these from everything else, and should we be treating these concurrently? So I think in my opinion, I think a lot of my colleagues overstate the problem of chlamydia pneumoniae and mycoplasma pneumoniae. The more common co-infections actually are Babesia and Bartonella. And then chlamydia pneumoniae and mycoplasma pneumoniae can be infections transmitted by ticks, including something called Mycoplasma fermentans as well too. But if we look at Mycoplasma pneumoniae, Chlamydia pneumoniae, I question if they're really part of the problem, even though we may be able to test and find them. And here's why I say that. So Chlamydia pneumoniae and Mycoplasma pneumoniae are very common bacteria infections that have nothing to do with tick transmission as well too. In other words, you can get them without having any tick problems at all, okay? If we were to pull 100 healthy people off the street and do antibody testing, we would find evidence of antibodies against Mycoplasma pneumoniae and Chlamydia pneumoniae in about 10%, or one of those, in about 10% of healthy people. Okay, yes, we can have germs that live in us that do not cause health problems because our immune systems keep them under control, all right? All right, now, if we were to pull 100 people off the street that have fatiguing disorders, we would find evidence in maybe about 40 or 50% of them of having elevated antibodies against chlamydia and mycoplasma, right? So yes, they can become part of the problem. My approach to dealing with them is to actually treat Lyme and to do all the steps in the successful treatment recipe, because once you do those, the immune system should kick on well enough to put those germs under control, okay? All right, so what are the symptoms of chlamydia and mycoplasma? Well, they're identical to Lyme symptoms, so we really can't use any specific symptoms to tease those out, okay? They lead to fatiguing disorders, basically. So just keep that in mind. All right. Now I've mentioned the successful treatment recipe again. So what I like to do again is treat Lyme for about 6 to 9 months. And only at that time will I even start looking at other infections that might be part of the mix besides co-infections. I always look for co-infections at the beginning. But chlamydia pneumonia and mycoplasma pneumonia, I think, are way overstated in terms of what they are as a problem. I know one of my colleagues, Horowitz, for instance, in his book, he thinks that a lot of the reason that people don't get better from Lyme is mycoplasma pneumonia. I disagree with him on that. I think that's a nice opinion, but I don't think there's science that backs it up. There's not science that backs up my opinion either, because frankly, we just don't have a lot of science in this disorder, but that's not been what my experience is, okay? The other thing I would point out is when we treat Lyme with the intracellular antibiotics that treat intracellular Lyme, the form of Lyme that lives inside of your cells, those are, the antibiotics would be the macrolides, which is zithromax and biaxin, also the tetracyclines like doxycycline, minocycline, tetracycline, rifampin, tinidazole. Those kind of antibiotics will also help go after chlamydia and mycoplasma too. So you should just be aware of that as well, okay? Now I want to do a screen share again because I've mentioned it a couple times. I'm just going to walk through it here. So again, this is the Lyme disease, my Lyme disease guidelines. I wrote this a number of years ago. I've updated periodically, but basically it forms this framework of how I build treatments even here at the Healing Arts Partnership when I see people one-on-one in my office, okay? And so first part that's essential to any treatment is to get sleep. And sleep is 7 to 9 hours a night would be ideal because it helps lower inflammation cytokines, which are inflammatory chemicals made by your immune system. It also helps restore your whole body, all right? So you want to go ahead and get sleep. And I give you some ways to do that here. So number one, make sure you're focusing on sleep. Number two, be on a good diet that's designed to improve energy, that is also designed to limit sugar going in, which could feed too many yeast in your intestines. Also one that's designed to help your brain work better. And I have written a whole article about that. The diet is called the best brain inflammation, pain, and energy detox diet ever. I feel strongly about this diet. It's a diet I actually got from a group called the Institute for Functional Medicine. It's a paleo type diet, okay? So I take a look at that. That's critical, sleep and diet. Notice I've even started having people take any antibiotics yet in this protocol. It's because I'm building the most important parts before you even start killing your germs with antibiotics, all right? Third thing you want to do is you need to lower inflammation chemicals called cytokines. So cytokines are good and bad. They're made by white blood cells when they see an infection, but they can get made in, but the immune system doesn't do a good job and getting rid of Lyme, and eventually it overproduces cytokines. And cytokines give you all your Lyme symptoms, all right? So we say somebody has Lyme symptoms, what they really have are too many cytokine symptoms. And those too many cytokines can suppress the immune system, okay? So you want to lower them. My favorite way to do that is to use curcumin, which is a component of turmeric. So make sure you're on curcumin. I like people to be on something called an adaptogen. These come to us out of Chinese medicine and out of East Indian Ayurvedic medicine. These are herbs that can boost the body's ability to fight, basically, okay? Number 5, correct any hormone problems that you have. And I tell you here how to figure out if you do have hormone problems. Number 6, be on a good multivitamin. Number 7, figure out if you have too many yeast in your intestines, and often people with Lyme disease do. The reason that's an issue is too many yeast, like Lyme, also trigger too many cytokines, okay? And you want to lower those cytokines. So figure out if you have too many yeast. The way you can figure out if you have too many yeast is to do this questionnaire. I'm just kind of moving my cursor over it right here. Click on this link. It'll take you to a questionnaire that helps you figure out if you have too many yeast. Number 8, treat your infections, okay? The Lyme infections. Number 9, do some detox. And number 10, treat your Bartonella and Babesia, all right? These are kind of like the critical steps. Do these before anything else, okay? All right, then I talk about the things to do later in your treatment if all this isn't working, of which one of those is treat chronic virus infections. Another one is do specific things to get rid of biofilms, etc. Okay, so there's a lot of other stuff you could do, but I don't even bother messing with these other things until we've done the essential steps first for about 6 to 9 months and done targeted treatments against Lyme and the co-infections, but not mycoplasma, not chlamydia. I generally think they're overstated problems, okay? All right, let me go back here. So those are all the steps you need to do to boost your immune system. That's a big thing, okay, is to help you feel better and boost your immune system. All right, thanks for that question, Ben. Hello, Lisa. Let's see. Let me get that posted, actually. Let's see. Dr. Ross, what is your opinion on vaccines creating a susceptibility of contracting Lyme? Could there be a connection between the immune system dysfunction and being susceptible? Okay. So that is actually not my opinion. And I'm interested in where that idea came from. Here's what my observation is, all right? So my observation is immunizations, when given in somebody who has active Lyme, can cause the Lyme to get more active, or we will see that the Lyme germ gets more active. People develop more symptoms of Lyme. And then where that really can happen with is the flu vaccine, all right? So I really don't recommend flu vaccines, even in flu season. I think it's a bad idea for somebody with Lyme. The reason that I think it happens is I think that given the vaccines actually suppresses the immune system against Lyme temporarily, which can allow the Lyme infection to grow more rapidly. All right. So it's a common thing that we'll see is that with immunizations, people will tend to get worse. Now, having said that, there are situations I still advocate doing immunizations, but the big one I would not do is the flu vaccine. I think that is a poor choice to use when we get into flu season. Two reasons. Number one is it doesn't work that well anyhow. If you look at post flu season statistics, it looks like the flu vaccine chosen for the season only works around 40% of the time on average. Okay, so it doesn't do that well anyhow. And then you have a great risk of flaring up the flu. All right, so that's what the relationship is between vaccines and Lyme. Probably not quite as you stated there, Lisa. All right. All right. Thank you for that question. All right, let's see here. Hello, Sandy. Let's see. If one is considering pulsing herbal Lyme treatment, what are your recommendations for doing so? So, everyone, there's currently a how can I say this? In the world of Lyme, we go through phases where we think something is doing better than other things, okay? And currently, the new vogue thing to do is to pulse antibiotics. Frankly, I don't see that there's much difference in pulsing versus using continuous, all right? I want you to know that. I will periodically try pulsing if a person gets blocked in their treatment. But I know that many of my colleagues are starting to see this as a way to go. There's many different ways to pulse antibiotics. The one antibiotic, though, that I don't think is an antibiotic that's good to pulse is Zithromax. And the reason is that once Zithromax gets in you, it takes about a good week or so to get out of you. All right. So to start and stop Zithromax, even if you stop it for a few days or even a week, this is probably much remained in you anyhow. It's still active. So you don't really get much benefit by starting and stopping it. Okay. In terms of how do you pulse antibiotics? Well, one way to do it is to use your antibiotics for 4 days on, 3 days off. That's a common way that I'll wind up doing some of them. Another option would be to take your spirochete agents, the cell wall agents, those that punch holes in the covering of the Lyme germ. That would be your cephalosporins like ceftriaxone or cefuroxime, and amoxicillin, your penicillins, bicillin, amoxicillin. They effectively work by punching holes in the covering of the germ, okay? So the cephalosporins, the penicillins, also your macrolides, which is Biaxin, not Zithromax. Zithromax is a macrolide, but again, I don't pulse that one. And your tetracyclines, all right? You can use those for like 3 weeks on, and you could do it like 4 days in a row and then 3 days off and be on that for 3 weeks, then take a break. And during the week that you're off, break out your cystbusters, which would be your tinidazole or your metronidazole. That's one way to do it, okay? The other way I sometimes will do is I don't take that 1 week off. I just use everything for 4 days on, 3 days off, including metronidazole and tinidazole, okay? Another way to do pulsing is one way that I'll do in people that I think are developing treatment resistance. And that is, and this would be people that are developing something called a dormant Lyme, or also known as persister Lyme, which is they're just not responding to antibiotics anymore. And usually that's going to occur after they've been on antibiotics for a while. And so in that situation, we think what happens is the Lyme germ can move more into cyst forms. The Lyme germ can move over into biofilm communities, which are slime layers that cover the germ that block out antibiotics. And then the other thing that can happen is the Lyme germ just stops growing rapidly. And if it's not growing that quickly, it's not going to respond to the antibiotics so well, okay? All right. So one thing we can do is more of a long-term pulse, which is do 2 months continuous of your antibiotics and then take 2 months off. Okay, so that's like a long arching way of pulsing. And the idea behind that is that when you use your antibiotics for a while, at a point the germ slows down in growing, so you stop. And what happens then is the germ that has moved into biofilm communities and has moved into cyst forms comes out of those forms, comes out of the biofilms, and also starts growing more rapidly, so that then when you add the antibiotics back in, it can really knock them down, okay? Now, the person that came up with that idea is a guy named Dr. Burrascano. Many of you may be familiar with him. He's one of the pioneers of Lyme treatment in the country. He believes it's a way that he cured his own Lyme. Frankly, in using it, I see it helps maybe about 30% of the time, okay? All right, so anyhow, those are just some ideas. There's not a precise way that anyone has found as the best way to pulse, and nor do I think it universally works, okay? All right, thanks for that question, Sandy. All right, let's get out of that. Let's see. Hello, Berlinda. Let's see. Hello, Dr. Ross. I love these webinars. Thank you. I was wondering what your thoughts are on elemental silver, the Rife light, and the PEMF mat. So I don't know about the PEMF mat. I haven't heard of it before. I'll have to look into it now that I've seen your questions. As I said, sometimes in these webinars, I get introduced to new ideas that I check out and I decide if I want to use them or not. I assume if it's called a PEMF, that stands for electromagnetic frequencies, okay? So it probably would work in a similar fashion to what Rife machines do. All right, so let's talk about Rife machines. So Rife is a type of technology that uses a machine that generates electromagnetic frequencies, and then they're radiated through you, basically, or they're spread through you. The idea is that you can find an electromagnetic frequency that resonates with the covering of the Lyme germ in a fashion that it will burst. Okay, so that's the theory behind it. Much like if you were to take a singer and put them in front of a glass of water, that they could sing in a way that would burst that glass of water. Same idea with what a Rife machine can do. All right. Now, I can't recommend them because the Food and Drug Administration forbids me from doing that here in the United States. And part of the reason is considered experimental. And part of the reason is, well, there's a lot of conspiracies why, but I'll just leave it at that. So what I can tell you, though, is I don't recommend it because I'm forbid to do it. But what I can tell you is what I know about it based on what my patients do anyhow, even though I'm forbid to recommend it. What I see with Rifing is that it seems to help about 60% of the time. The way that Rifing works, because it resonates with the covering of the germ, it probably does best at treating spirochete Lyme, because the spirochete form of the Lyme germ has a covering on it to resonate, okay? It probably does not do a good job against intracellular Lyme and may also not do a good job against cyst Lyme. So when somebody is doing Rifing, if they choose to do that, what I usually recommend is that they still be on at least a single antibiotic. And if they're going to do just a single antibiotic, that would be metronidazole, tinidazole, or rifampin, because all those can treat intracellular Lyme and also can treat the cyst form of the Lyme germ, okay? That's my opinion, all right? Now, I know there's another author out there, a guy named Brian Rossner, that has written quite a bit about Rifing. He believes this is how he got over Lyme. He also, if you read through his materials, he'll also say something similar in that regard as well, too, okay? All right, now, silver. So silver, there's different ways of doing silver, elemental, colloidal. The big thing about silver, depending on the size, and I'm not sure what you mean specifically by elemental, what the product is, but you got to be careful with silver because you could develop too great of a quantity in you. Once it gets in you, it stays in you. And you can get deposits of it in your skin, and it can turn you blue. All right. And I actually do mean that. It can turn you blue. And if once you get that blue color, it's not coming out. You're stuck looking that way. So most manufacturers will have a lifetime limit that they recommend. There are some manufacturers that claim that they are making it in such small particles now that there isn't the concern of it depositing in the skin, but I'm not clear if that's true, okay? So I just want to caution you. Now, in terms of does it work, I think it helps maybe about 50% of the time. I'm not really impressed with it. I think there's other things you can do, and as you know, I write about many of those in the Treat Lyme book. So, but anyhow, those are my thoughts on that, okay? All right. Thank you for that question, Belinda, and good luck. All right. Hello, Debbie. Let me go ahead and just take a glass of water here just a minute. All right. Hi, Debbie. I hope you and your daughter are doing okay. Let's see. Is SAM-E useful supplement for MTHFR defect patients for Lyme in general? Thank you again for your time and expert advice. All right. So, let me start with, yes, it can be, Debbie. Let me start by saying that, but let me round it out here a little bit too. All right. So there's a detoxification problem, everyone, called MTHFR, which stands for methotetrahydrofolate reductase. That's a mouthful, okay? Anything in medicine that ends in ASE, reductase, is an enzyme, okay? So let me talk about that first, and then let me talk about SAM-E, all right? So the most important detox chemical that we use in our body is something called glutathione, all right? And it's made in every one of our cells. It helps detox in cells. It helps repair damage to cells as well too, all right? And the liver uses it as its main detox agent. It's a downstream product, okay? It's down here at the bottom, all right? Way up here, many chemical reactions before glutathione, we've got to be able to take folate from our diet, and we have to we have to activate it. And the enzyme that takes that folate from our diet and activates it is methotetrahydrofolate reductase, all right? Some people have a genetic programming problem with their MTHFR, causing it to turn out deformed, if you will, not correctly structured. And so it will not be able to adequately convert all that folate into activated folate. And if that happens, downstream, you don't get enough glutathione, so you can have a shortage of glutathione, therefore detoxing problems. But also between this reaction and glutathione is a bunch of smaller reactions that help with detox, and some of those may not take place well, okay? All right. So the way to find out if you have an MTHFR defect, there is testing you can do to see if you have that genetic defect. Some of the regular labs are now doing it here in the States, but you can do it without even getting an order from your doctor. And the way to do that is to go to a website called geneticgenie.org, and that's GENETIC Genie, GENIE.org. And through that, there's a link that you can do to click on a testing company called 23andMe. It's a spit test. You send it down, they do the raw data, and then you take that raw data back to geneticgenie.org and you run it through a program they have that will help you analyze whether you have that MTHFR defect or not, okay? So that would be some useful information. Okay, now, here's one of the problems. This is where SAMe comes in. One of the problems that can happen when you have when you start correcting this MTHFR abnormality and you start getting this detox cycle to work correctly, there can be another blockade further down where I'm trying to see if I remember this one correctly, Debbie. I believe the blockade further down has to do with something called COMT, which is a process by which we remove catecholamines. Actually, I'm sorry, it's a separate process altogether. There could be another problem in our ability to remove some catecholamines, which is adrenaline-like chemicals, all right? And if you have that blockade and you correct the MTHFR, you've got all these chemicals coming through now, and they hit this blockade here. And what happens is the catecholamines don't break down. So you can start having too much anxiety, basically. One way to correct that, my understanding is to use the SAMe. Now, I got to admit, I'm not the most expert in this area, okay? But one way to correct that, as I understand, is to do the SAMe to correct that and make it so that you can still keep doing your MTHFR correction. If you are to do SAMe, it usually comes as a 200 milligram pill, and you can work up to a total of 600 milligrams twice a day on that, okay? That's what I understand of it. I have had one person that got really jacked up, too anxious on the correcting for the MTHFR, and this is the solution I tried, and it did make a difference for that one person, okay? All right. Thank you for that question, Debbie. So everyone, if you want to see more about various detox problems that you can have in Lyme, take a look at the table of contents in the Treat Lyme book. There's a chapter I have written on detoxification, and it talks about why it's critical to be on the good diet I've recommended, okay? And it also talks about some basic steps that everyone should do for detoxification. I even have a full article I've written about this miraculous glutathione. I call it the Great Fixer because it does a lot of important things. And then in here, we talk about Lyme and mold toxins, some detox problems people have with that. And also there's a whole article on this MTHFR that I was telling you about, okay? All right. So let me go back here. All right. Take care, Debbie. Thank you for that question. Hello, Deborah. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. My doc just had me stop Bactrim due to increased creatinine, 1.26, and a glomerular filtration rate, that's what GFR stands for, of 47. The glomerulus is the filtering part of the kidneys, okay? And it has to be able to filter out your toxins into your urine. And if it's not working correctly, usually a level 55 or 60 or below 55 to 60 usually means there's some impairment of how the kidneys are working. How quickly do the kidneys repair any residual problems? Can Mepron cause the decreased kidney function? So Mepron usually does not cause decreased kidney function. And that's because Mepron is cleared by the liver. It's not cleared by the kidneys. Bactrim can cause liver dysfunction at times. My experience is 90–95% of the time, once you stop the Bactrim, that will correct itself, okay? So you have good possibility it's going to get better. It's usually over about a 2 to 4 week period of time that you'll get that function back, okay? And everyone, the creatinine that she mentioned here is a protein that's cleaned out by the kidneys. And if they're not working well enough to clean it out, it's going to become elevated. Usually it's going to be at a level of about 1.1 or higher, depending on how the lab reports it. And then that would indicate that it's elevated if it's 1.1 or higher. Okay? All right. Good luck, Deborah. Oh, Deborah, the other thing that can sometimes lead to in terms of the antibiotics, another thing that can commonly lead to elevation in your creatinine and also decreased GFR are the tetracyclines. So like your minocycline, doxycycline, and tetracycline, okay? All right. Let's see here. Hello, Jackie. Let's see. I would appreciate your advice, Dr. Marty. I used to care for identical twin boys, now 16 years. Born very prematurely. Let's see. D was only 1.5 pounds, stayed in the hospital 10 weeks, unsure if he received blood transfusion. D has autism while brother does not. Grew up in central New Jersey where both Lyme and autism are very common. I'm going to speak with parents about Lyme autism link. I'm concerned they may not want to pay out of pocket for IGeneX and Lyme Literate MD. Purchase the Lyme Autism Connection. Can you please advise any articles, websites, or personal experience on this matter to alert the parents? Okay. So I'm not familiar with any specific website or articles about the topic, Jackie, unfortunately. I just don't have that information. I will tell you, autism is a very complex problem. And often there are multiple factors that can add together to create the problem. And one of those can be Lyme infection. Now, it is complex. And so there are times when I have people with autism or children with autism that I will treat for Lyme if they have Lyme. And I'll find it can make a difference, but I don't find it's going to totally resolve the whole problem, all right? So it can be one of the added factors that adds up to this complex condition called autism. That's been what my experience is, all right? And thank you for that question. I think you had tried to post it a number of weeks ago, but for some reason I wasn't able to find the various running parts of that. So anyhow, all right. Thank you for that question. Good luck. Let me remove these. Just wait a minute here, everyone. I got to clean out the parts of that question so that I don't post them up again. All right. Hello, Jim. Let's see. Have you used real-time labs for mycotoxin testing, and do you find them to be accurate when one has been exposed to mold? The answer is yes and yes, I do. So everyone, real-time is a lab that is based out of Texas. They have a technique to look at mold toxins, and specifically they can measure in your urine 3 types of mold toxins. One is called trichosethine, which is black mold toxin, and also something called ochratoxin and aflatoxin. Those are 2 types of toxins that are made by a type of fungus that you find in wet buildings called Aspergillus, all right? The ochratoxin also can be found on grains, and so sometimes people will pick it up from grains. The issue with toxins is that, and this is based upon the work of a physician named Richie Shoemaker. Many of you may be aware of him. Dr. Shoemaker has been able to show through an elaborate science that approximately 25 to 30% of all people, healthy and not healthy, have a genetic defect where they are not able to process Lyme and or mold toxins, okay? That's a genetic defect called an HLA-DR defect. And if you happen to be one of the people with this problem, what happens in people that don't have the problem is our immune system will see a Lyme toxin or a mold toxin that we breathe in, drink in, or then in case of Lyme is living in us because Lyme is in us. And it will see them and it'll tag it for removal. Once they're tagged, they go to the liver, where the liver will then process them and change them from being a fat-based toxin into a water-based toxin, and then moves them out into the intestines where they get pooped out, okay? Because water-based toxins will mix in with our poop, we poop them out. Now, in the 25% that Dr. Shoemaker has identified, what happens is the immune system does not tag those toxins. Okay, so they don't get identified by the liver. The liver does not transform them then from a fat-based toxin into a water-based toxin. They come out fat-based still. They go into the intestines and they get reabsorbed again. So you get this endless loop of recirculating toxins. All right. Now these toxins, the problem is that they flare up cytokines. All right. If you can't remove them, just like Lyme triggers cytokines, and I know I talked about it briefly earlier tonight when I talked about the successful treatment recipe, my Lyme disease treatment guideline. I talked about toxins, or I'm sorry, I've talked about cytokines. But cytokines are what make you feel bad in Lyme. So if you can't get the toxins out, you're going to keep making too many cytokines from result of having all those toxins. All right. So the way you treat it is you bind up the toxins in the intestines, and you can do cholestyramine, which is a prescription anti-cholesterol medicine, or there are some. My favorite herbal way to do it is to use something called fractionated pectin powder. Pectin, found in apples and found in citrus, can bind those toxins up too. Some of my colleagues will use charcoal. Some will use bentonite clay. Some of my colleagues will use chlorella. I don't think chlorella works well. If we look at the relative strength on these toxin binders, I would put cholestyramine way up here. It's the strongest. And then probably about 80-70% is potent. I would do the fractionated pectin powder. And then probably about 30-40% is potent. It would be the bentonite clay and charcoal. Okay, that's kind of how I grade these. In terms of how I use the cholestyramine, how I use the fractionated pectin powder, take a look at the article that I have written about these issues. It's going to be in the detox chapter, and you can find it here. It's called Lyme and Mold Toxins, a Lyme Bite. Okay, there's a lot more information in there that you can look at later. Again, it's part of the Treat Lyme book. Okay, all right, let me go back here. All right, Jim, thank you for the question and good luck. Oh, in terms of real-time, I think is a reputable lab. I actually have been impressed with the results. The downside of their test is it's expensive, and insurance typically does not pay for it. An alternative to doing the test, and I know Dr. Shoemaker this would not make him happy at all, but an alternative to doing that test or even doing HLA-DR testing, which is also expensive, is to just do a trial cholestyramine, see what happens. Now you have to be careful whenever you start removing these toxins. The act of moving the toxins out triggers a cytokine flare, which can look like a Herxheimer reaction, because a Herxheimer reaction is also a cytokine flare that occurs when you kill germs. All right. Technically, moving toxins out and the increased cytokines is not called a Herxheimer reaction, but just like a Herxheimer reaction, it is an increased amount of cytokines. So you have to be careful. Usually I have people start at a low dose and work up, and talk about how to do that in the article. All right. And you want to do about a good 2 to 3 months of doing a trial to see if it's going to work. Now, I'm not a big tester of the HLA in terms of what Richie Shoemaker advises, because I don't find it's always accurate. Sometimes it can say you have the genetic predisposition, but then we go and remove the toxins and people don't get benefit. Sometimes I have found that even when they don't have the genetic predisposition, they still respond to the treatment. So I don't think that Dr. Shoemaker has all of the answers with his HLA-DR test as well either. Okay? All right. Thank you, Jim. Good luck to you. Hello, Holly. Let's see. Hi. I asked that question a few weeks ago, and according to your answer, I guess I should have been more specific. My doctor drew a B Burgdorferi screen antibody, IgG and IgM, which came back positive. The antibodies were present, but the IgG and IgM were negative. She told me I had Lyme. The ID doctor said something here. Let me see, Holly, there should be a second part to your question. Well, darn it, Holly. It looks like you're, I didn't get the second part to your question. Let me just say one thing. So what came back positive in your test was the antibody screen, also called an ELISA test, okay? So in Lyme testing, we do something called an ELISA. And if it's positive, then we do the second step, which is to look at the Western blot. The ELISA test is designed to say, of all the antibodies that your immune system has ever made to attack a germ, could some of those be Lyme antibodies? All right. Could some of those been made against the Lyme germ? So it's a good test. It's not specific for Lyme, though. And so when it comes back positive, we have to do a second step, which is the Western blot. And the Western blot then looks at, do you have antibodies in you that actually attach to the Lyme germ? Okay, that's what a Western blot is. And specifically, the Western blot looks to say, do you have antibodies that attach to certain proteins found on the covering of the germ? If any of you have a Western blot, you'll know there's a bunch of numbers that get reported on that test. And what those numbers are, those are proteins. We identify by what they weigh. Those are the weights of those proteins. And we look to see if you have antibodies against a number of those proteins before we say it's positive, okay? Now, an ELISA coming back positive does not prove you have Lyme. If it comes back positive, that means you need to then do the Western blot to confirm if the ELISA test was accurate. I don't do an ELISA test because a good screening test should overfind cases of Lyme, and it doesn't. The ELISA test is only good at finding Lyme if you have it 50% of the time. There's been some good studies about that. In fact, the American Academy of Pathologists has even said get rid of it. But for some reason, the infectious disease doctors and the so-called authorities at the Centers for Disease Control still hold on to this idea of using the ELISA test first, and it's a rotten test, okay? Now, in terms of the Western blot, there are different interpretation standards on the Western blot. And the infectious disease doctors tend to follow the guidelines recommended by the CDC and their misinformed so-called specialists, as well as the specialists at the Infectious Disease Society of America, who are so-called Lyme specialists as well, too. And they use a standard which is different than I and most other doctors that treat Lyme use, okay? So the reason your ID doctor may have said the test was negative is that she or he may have been looking and using the standards put out by the CDC. All right, and those standards are, on your IgM Western blot, your test is positive if you have antibodies against protein 2 of either protein 23, 39, or 41. 2 of those, okay? All right, and on there's 10 they test for on the IgG, and if you're positive against 5 of those 10, then that's a positive test, all right? I use a different standard, and so that which is put out by IGeneX. The IGeneX method is a better interpretation standard, and that interpretation standard says you should have antibodies against 2 of the following 6 proteins, either 2325, which is 1 protein, protein 31, 34, 39, 41, or 83-93. If you have antibodies against 2 of those on either your IgM or your IgG, that's a positive test, okay? The IGeneX standard was designed to find Lyme, and it will correctly find Lyme if you have it about 85% of the time. And when it finds it, according to internal studies, it is correct 96% of the time. The CDC method of interpreting the Western blot was designed for bean counters down at the Centers for Disease Control who are trying to figure out how much of an illness is in an area, okay? They don't get to go out and talk to the person. They don't get to get a full understanding by sitting and hearing a person's story about the illness. So they want a test that when it comes across their desk is right 100% of the time. So their interpretation standard will find Lyme on a Western blot if you have it just 60% of the time. And when it finds it, though, it's right 100% of the time. So the IGeneX interpretation standard that I just told you about will find it 85% of the time. The CDC Western blot interpretation standard will only find it correctly 60% of the time, okay? Now, most likely if you saw an infectious disease doctor, they were going to use the standard of the CDC. That's just what they do, okay? Now, there's one other confusing thing I want to talk to you about what your infectious disease doctor may have done here too. So when we make antibodies, we make 2 kinds of antibodies. We make IgM antibodies and IgG antibodies against Lyme, and they have 2 different meanings. IgM antibodies are made actually in any infection. They're the first family of antibodies we make when we get sick. And they're supposed to go away by around 3 months, 6 weeks to 3 months, depending on the infection. Once they go away, they get replaced by IgG antibodies. Once we make IgG antibodies, they are the memory of the immune system, and they're supposed to remain there, okay? So if you get an IgG test back that's positive, it doesn't tell you whether the germ is still in you, because they're going to remain positive even if a germ is gone. The best we can say about an IgG is it's evidence the germ has been in you, okay? It may still be there or not. You just can't tell by looking at the test, all right? Now, IgMs are supposed to go away, all right? However, 80% of the time that somebody has chronic Lyme of a year duration or more, in my experience, and in the experience of most of my colleagues that treat chronic Lyme, 80% of the time, those IgMs don't go away. The infectious disease doctors, instead of saying, that's interesting, I wonder why that happens, what they do is they put their heads in the sand and they just say, it's got to be a false positive test. It's wrong because it's supposed to go away. Instead of saying, wow, that's interesting that that happens, okay? So another reason your infectious disease doctor could have called this a negative test is if it's the IgM that came back positive and you have been sick for more than 3 months, they may just be calling it a false positive test, okay? Now, I have a whole explanation. If you want to hear more about this and actually look at diagrams, etc., there is a video that I have created about how to interpret a Western blot. Let me go ahead. I'm going to do a screen share to show that to you. And so where you can find that, and so I know I just talked to you with words, but this has diagrams and pictures on it. Take a look at the chapter on testing called Tests. Okay, and in it, I talk about the Western blot. Here it is. The Western blot Lyme disease test, a Lyme bite. It's a video. I think it's about a 10-minute video or so, but it'll give you a very detailed explanation about what I just talked about. If you want to come back and re-look at this and actually look at the diagrams more as well too. Okay, all right. All right, thank you for that question. Now, Holly, I know I didn't see your whole question. I hope I just gave you enough of an answer that would cover about any possibility of what that question was going to be, okay? All right, let's go on here. Let's see here. Hello, Sarah. Hold on here just a minute. I want to take another swig of water, everyone. All right, let's see. Hi, Sarah. Let's see. With Lyme disease, why would deep tissue massage and certain exercises which never bothered me before cause quite a bit of pain the next day and for some time afterward? What can be done to alleviate this problem? So I don't know why it happens, okay, Sarah, but I do know it happens, and that is deep tissue massage, and a lot of my patients just makes things a lot worse. It's not across the board, though. Some of my patients can go for their deep tissue massage and it doesn't bother them. I don't know whether it has to do with maybe aggravating the tissue, getting the tissues to release more Lyme germs into the bloodstream. That's a theory I have, but clearly people do get more inflamed. And so the solution is just not do deep tissue. You might want to do light massage. The other thing is the pain, again, comes from cytokines. So as you know, I have the successful treatment recipe, my Lyme disease treatment guidelines. Make sure you're following steps to lower cytokines, okay? And so my main way that I recommend to do that is with curcumin, 500 milligrams 3 times a day. There is a more recent article that I have that many of you may be familiar with. It's about cytokines. And in it, I outline other ways to lower those cytokines. And I'm in the Treat Lyme book. I'm just showing you where it is. There's this one called Control Cytokines, a guide to fix Lyme symptoms and the immune system, okay? Now, the reason I say fix the immune system, again, is if you have too many cytokines, they suppress the immune system. So in this article, there's a whole video that I have here as well, too, talk more about the cytokines. I talked to you more about various ways they're made. And in addition in this article to doing curcumin and getting sleep, I outline a bunch of other things that you can do too, all right? So you may want to come back here later and take a look at this article about ways that I have found to be successful at lowering cytokines. And this picture right here, this is actually what a cytokine looks like on a crystal structure diagram. This is a specific cytokine called interleukin 1A, okay? All right, let me go back here. I think I'm going back here. Let's see here. All right, thank you, Sarah, for that question. And good luck. All right, let's see. Hello, Jackson. Let's see, I'm taking Houttuynia and have found that I have more joint and angina-like pain when I am on the herb. Is this a good thing or potentially bad? I don't think it's a bad thing. So it could either be a direct side effect, okay, or even though Houttuynia is an herb that we use to treat Bartonella, and technically killing Bartonella does not cause Herxheimer reactions, okay? That's something more unique to Lyme and also unique to killing yeast. And also syphilis, all right? And this doesn't do anything for syphilis. Sometimes the things that we use for Bartonella may have a weak degree of activity or some activity against Lyme. And it's my opinion that when somebody has a worsening that occurs on Houttuynia, I think it's also killing the Lyme germ in part. I wouldn't use it as a Lyme agent. In other words, I wouldn't rely on it. But I suspect what's happening is you're probably getting some killing of the Lyme germs with your Houttuynia, okay? So take a look at the cytokine article I was just showing you. It gives you ideas on how to lower those cytokines that occur when you have a killing reaction or a Herxheimer reaction, okay? Again, my main thing I like to do is curcumin, 500 milligrams, 3 times a day, all right? Okay. Thank you for that question, Jackson. All right, let's see here. Hello, Gary. I talked earlier about elemental silver in another question, so I'd take a look at the recording tomorrow about my feelings about silver, okay? All right. And I don't have a specific brand I recommend either. And thank you for that question. Hello, Emily. Let's see. I've been stable on the same protocol, Plaquenil and rifampin, for about 6 months. If I'm doing well, is there a reason to rotate? So it depends on what you mean by stable. If you are stable and you're still getting better, great. It's probably working well for you. But if you're stable and you're not getting better, then it's probably time to make a change, okay? And in terms of your protocol, the rifampin, again, I think is going to be good for Bartonella. It's probably treating cyst Lyme and intracellular Lyme, but I don't see it doing anything for spirochete Lyme, so be careful. Plaquenil, some of my colleagues will use to treat cyst Lyme and also for inflammation. I don't think it's useful for cyst Lyme. There's competing studies that actually show it may trigger more cyst Lyme, so be careful with that. If you happen to be working with a provider that's using it to treat your cyst, and if you are not on anything for cyst Lyme, like grapefruit seed extract, like rifampin, like metronidazole, like tinidazole, then you ought to talk to your provider. I think they're not doing right by you because I don't think Plaquenil is a good anti-cyst agent, okay? So those are just some thoughts that I have, all right? All right, good luck to you, Emily. Hello, Elizabeth. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Do you find dysautonomia often in Lyme patients, and what do you do about it? Okay, so dysautonomia, everyone, means imbalance in the what is called the autonomic nervous system, which is also your adrenaline, anti-adrenaline part of the nervous system. Okay, that, and it goes by the name also the sympathetic parasympathetic nervous system. All right. So as you know, and adrenaline, whenever you get scared by something, it's an adrenaline rush that you get. Adrenaline helps maintain heart speed and can help keep your blood pressure up, keep your heart working correctly. Anti-adrenaline slows the heart down, sometimes can cause you to faint, can give you skipping and racing of your heart, can give you a lot of fatigue, okay? Some people have such a severe imbalance in this that they have a heart syndrome called POTS, which stands for paroxysmal orthostatic tachycardic syndrome, all right? It's a mouthful, but basically your heart, you faint easily and your heart races a lot. That's what POTS means, okay? Now, the two things that can cause dysautonomia most commonly are the Babesia co-infection causes an imbalance in your adrenaline, anti-adrenaline system. Also, Lyme can sometimes. And the way that Lyme does it is Lyme can infect the nerve that regulates your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, called the vagal nerve. And if it affects the vagal nerve, infects the vagal nerve, sometimes it will cause an imbalance as well too. All right. So look to see that if you have Babesia. One way to, again, with Babesia, there's a whole article I have about it, about how you diagnose Babesia. You'll find it in the How to Diagnose chapter. But basically, I don't believe in doing testing, because testing will miss many of the strains. We estimate that there can be about 15 to 20 strains of Babesia. We're only decent testing about 2 strains. So we look at symptoms. And the symptoms that can indicate Babesia are drenching night sweats, panic attacks, air hunger, a feeling you can't get enough air at times, frontal headaches, severe migraines sometimes, racing or skipping of your heart, fainting can be part of it, coughing can be part of it sometimes. And then a most peculiar symptom is that sometimes people with Babesia get frequent deja vu experiences. And it's very peculiar when it's there. You can actually follow how they're doing with their treatment. That will gradually go away as you treat their Babesia, okay? So what you do about your dysautonomia is treat your germs, figure out what your germs are and treat them. The other thing that I will do often is to correct the adrenals if they happen to be low, and have people take a teaspoon or more of salt a day, which helps expand water, holds more water in your blood system, which expands blood volume so that as you stand up, you don't faint as easily either, okay? So those are just some thoughts that I have about that, all right? Good luck to you, Elizabeth. Hello, Rose. Let's see. Do you use the iSpot Lyme test? What are your thoughts on it? So I do rarely use the iSpot Lyme test. I think that the gold standard for me still is the Western blot, because I trust the results of it. The iSpot test is looking to see if you have an immune reaction against the Lyme germ. Specifically, it looks at a type of white blood cell that we make called T cells, and it measures if those T cells from us, when exposed to certain proteins from the Lyme, releases certain cytokines, actually, okay? All right. Now, the problem with the test is we don't have good controlled studies to show that it's effective. There have been some studies done, but they were really poor quality. So I'm not clear about the actual effectiveness at the iSpot of finding the Lyme germ. And I still think, for me, that the best test that I know in terms of accuracy is the Western blot test, looking at that. I may occasionally do an iSpot test if I don't have enough evidence from a Western blot. Then sometimes I will look out to do the iSpot test. But in terms of effectiveness, I think it's still the jury's out as to whether it's a good test to do or not to do. All right. All right. Thank you for that question, Rose. Hello, Vinny. Let's see. Treating Lyme and Babesia decani for 14 months without progress. Now on azithromycin and rifampin for potential Bartonella. Symptoms are calves, twitch, cramp, painful, lymph nodes in the neck sensitive, jaw pain, throat discomfort, dizziness, and frontal head pressure, tinnitus, floaters, insomnia, and bottom feet ache. Let's see. Do you feel it sounds like Bartonella? If so, how long before I can see positive results? All right, let me go back here. Well, let me just talk about Bartonella, about how quickly do you see results, and then I'll talk about what do I think is Bartonella. So typically when you treat Bartonella and you are on an effective regimen for your Bartonella, within 1 to 2 months, you should start seeing the symptoms that suggest Bartonella get better, okay? That's usually what I'll see. Now, getting over Bartonella and Lyme because of immune suppression caused by Lyme, Bartonella can be tricky to treat sometimes. Usually it's going to take about 4 to 6 months total, all right? In terms of the regimen that you are on, let me go back here. This regimen that you have, The azithromycin and rifampin is one of my tier 1 treatments. I showed you all an article earlier tonight about the types of treatments that I recommend for Bartonella. This is a tier 1 treatment. It works about 85–90% of the time. Yeah, so you should see some improvements with this within about a month or two of your Bartonella symptoms, okay? Now, what are Bartonella symptoms? So Bartonella symptoms can be pain on the soles of the feet, ongoing anxiety, where it's just kind of with you all the time, all right? Which compares with Babesia anxiety, which is usually panic attacks. Anxiety surges is usually more consistent with Babesia. Bartonella tends to be more ongoing anxiety. Usually people with Bartonella are going to have some degree of cognitive impairment. And if you have cognitive impairment, thinking problems that are much worse in degree compared to your energy problems, then that's really a big sign that you could have Bartonella too, okay? Bartonella is known to also cause bladder irritability, meaning people will pee frequently or have urge to pee. Bartonella can give you restless legs, which is a feeling that you need to move your legs around quite a bit. Bartonella can create a lot of neurologic hypersensitivity, so sound sensitivity, light sensitivity, sometimes dizziness. Bartonella can give you head pressure, usually which is the whole head can feel with pressure. Bartonella can give you swollen lymph nodes, so I understand why they might be considering that in you. And finally, Bartonella sometimes can give a nervous system agitation, which can feel like internal buzzing or tremors, as some people will have. Or the other thing, like internal buzzing, meaning no one else sees it, but you feel it, all right? Or flat out tremors or seizures, okay? So now let me look at your symptoms here to see if I think you have it. So I'd love to know more about your thinking, and that would be a critical thing for me to know about. Calves twitching, that could sometimes be Bartonella, that may be Lyme. The lymph nodes make me wonder about Bartonella. Throat pain, yeah, sometimes I can fit with it. Dizziness and frontal headache. Frontal headache usually is more of a Babesia symptom. Tinnitus, which is ringing in the ears, yes, that can be part of it. The bottom of the feet aching, yes, it can be part of it. In terms of your symptoms, I think it's mixed from a symptom standpoint. However, when you treat Lyme and you're treating for a long time and everything else is not working, the suspicion of a missed co-infection getting in the way of that treatment goes up, okay? So the symptoms that I look at initially in somebody to decide if they have Bartonella or even Babesia, and I usually want a number of those symptoms. As treatment goes on and they're not getting better, then I'm going to lower the amount that I want, and I'm going to become more suspicious that a co-infection could be there, because co-infections that are missed can block your treatment. So do you have enough here that says maybe Bartonella? Yeah, and your treatment's not going forward. It's possible. I think maybe treating Bartonella would be a good idea. The other thing, though, Vinny, that I would take a look at is I have a whole chapter that I have written about other things to consider that could be blocking your treatment. So take a look at the chapter called Can't Get Better, Do This. This chapter has things that you should look at that could be blocking your treatment besides just a missed co-infection, okay? And then one of the things I put here is co-infection treatments. These are one of the things I list that you might want to consider if your treatment's not getting better. So you are looking at that, okay? But take a look at these other ideas I have here too, and you can see all these articles down here that I've written about things that you might want to consider if you're not getting better, okay? All right, let me go back here again. All right, so let me get rid of that. Thanks for that question, Vinny. Good luck to you. All right, let's see. Hello, Ben. Let's see. I read so often about the dangers of root canals in Lyme. Should we start pulling teeth? Boy. So what the problem is with root canals is you can get what are known as cavitations, which are small cavities underneath the root of the teeth that can be infected. And they can be infected with Lyme germs, and they can also be infected with other bacteria as well too. Cavitations are one of those things that can block treatment. I'm usually not going to start thinking about cavitations until somebody's into treatment for maybe 6 to 9 months and they're not getting better. So I wouldn't start there, okay? Now, if you've done all the other things that I mentioned in this last chapter that I was just recommending, you're still not getting better, then you might want to start looking at cavitations. I don't start there. I think I think it has low yield, low potential benefit of going after it. And no, I would not recommend yanking teeth out all the time. All right. All right. Thank you for that question, Ben. Hello, Rita. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I have been on Cryptolepis for the last 8 months and treating Babesia. Last night, I developed severe shortness of breath and throat pressure. Should I add another herbal to my treatment? I don't know if my symptoms are due to detox, HERC, or worsening my Babesia infection. I don't know either. I don't have enough detail from this question to be able to answer that for you. Other than what I would say is if it just happened for one night doesn't mean anything. You have to kind of look at what a trend of symptoms are for you, okay, Rita? So I'm sorry, I can't answer that specifically enough for you. If you would like some more direct input, one thing you could take a look at, I'll just do a quick screen share here. All right, so this is back at treatlyme.net. Down here on this tab on the left-hand side, there's an online consult tab. And this is a service that I run for people that don't come out to see me here, but it allows me to visit with you online and give you recommendations. The only thing I cannot do with this service is I cannot prescribe and I cannot order tests. But I can give you ideas that you might even want to discuss with your physician, okay? Read through how it works, and even look at the disclaimer just so to make sure you're comfortable with doing it. But this might be a way for me to give you more direct input. I would need to ask you a number of questions actually to do a little bit of a give and take on that, okay? All right. Let me go back here. All right. Thank you, Rita, for that question. And good luck. All right. Hello, Lisa. Good evening, Dr. Ross. I have recurring dental pain. All of my teeth ache and sting. No periodontal disease. I have read this on Lyme forums a few times, but wonder, do you feel this is a symptom associated with Lyme disease, antibiotic use, or oral candida? Thank you. I don't think it's candida because usually candida is going to give you an ongoing raw feeling in your mouth or it's going to have white patches, okay? The only way that I could see that this might be a Lyme disease type symptom would be some type of a neuropathy. The nerves of the teeth are involved. And so, you know, nerves being infected anywhere in the body can give pain. In this case, it could be dental pain. So it could be. I don't see it as a side effect of the antibiotics per se. And so you might even want to talk to your dentist and see if they think this is neurologic. If it is, it might get better as you continue to treat the Lyme germ. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Lisa. Thank you for that question. Hello, Ross. Let's see here. Hi, Dr. Ross. Do I need to add an L-form intracellular antibiotic like minocycline or clarithromycin to the bicillin LA tinidazole regimen? The answer is no. So the bicillin is a penicillin, and that treats spirochete Lyme by effectively resulting in holes developing in the covering of the germ. So as the germ grows, it bursts. Okay. Tinidazole has the ability to treat intracellular Lyme and also the cyst form of the Lyme germ. And therefore, I think you have a full treatment. You're treating all three forms. The other thing that tinidazole does that's good is it removes biofilms. According to some Petri dish experiments published a number of years ago by Eva Chapi, that's S-A-P-I, that's how you spell her last name, S-A-P-I. She was able to show that on Petri dishes, at least, that tinidazole can get rid of about maybe 90% of biofilm. So I like this treatment. I think and I do this kind of treatment often with a number of my patients too. All right. All right. Thank you for that question, Ross. right, Ross, I'll take another question from you since that was so easy. Let's see. Would nitoxazenide, also known as Houttuynia, that's a more common name that most of us use, be a better choice than artemether lumefantrine, which is also known as Coartem, in terms of effectiveness and side effects, and should I add any other drug? You know, I don't. So the Coartem I find to help maybe about 70% of the time, okay? The nitoxazenide, Houttuynia, for treating for babesia, probably about the same. I don't think either one is necessarily going to be the greatest way of going for treating babesia. I would take a look at the article, Ross, that I've written about called Kills Babesia. It gives you some other better options, I think, to use to treat your babesia, okay? All right. Thank you for that question, too. Hello, Julie. Let's see. My doctor has me on Ceftin 500 milligrams 2 times Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Biaxin 500 milligrams 2 times Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday, and Tindamax 500 milligrams 2 times Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Do you find this is enough for my Lyme? The answer is yeah. Again, I talked earlier tonight about pulsing, whether it's the greatest way to go or not. I think the jury is still out. I know it's the current vogue way of doing things, and this sounds like an acceptable way of doing it, okay? You've got antibiotics here that definitely will treat all 3 forms of your Lyme germ, so I would see no problem with this working. You're just going to have to see if it does, if pulsing this way works for you, okay? All right. Good luck, Julie. Hello, Louise. Let's see. Hello. Thank you for helping us. So I'm on 9-month course of minocycline, metronidazole, and hydroxychloroquine, also on heart meds, so can't take curcumin. Is there something else I can take? I'm not clear why you can't take curcumin with heart meds. I don't know if I totally agree with that, but there are some other things you can do. So take a look at the article that I have written about cytokines. Okay, I showed everyone that earlier. But an alternative that you might want to look at to the curcumin is quercetin. Quercetin is a bioflavonoid. It's a chemical found in the skin of colorful fruits and vegetables. It gets inside of white blood cells and also blocks cytokine production in a similar fashion to what the curcumin does, okay? And it's a 250 milligram pill. You want to do 2 pills 3 times a day. That would be a very reasonable alternative for you. It also has the advantage of being able to help out with allergies, because it stabilizes the types of cells in our bodies that make histamine and release histamines when we have allergic reactions, okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Louise. All right, everyone, believe it or not, I haven't seen this happen in a long time. That is the last posted question. And I'm pooped out. So instead of asking you to send more questions, I'm going to call it quits. Everyone, it's been great visiting with you tonight. I am going to go ahead and take Halo and Thor home. Some of you may have seen them hopping around here earlier tonight. I believe they were. Those are my Basenjis. They're looking at me like it's time as well, too. Tomorrow, you will get an email from me, as I promised, with a link to the recording of tonight's webinar. In there, you can go ahead and click on the link to the recording. You'll also will have an opportunity to sign up for next week's webinar as well, too. In a second here, I am going to take you over to the Treat Lyme site, where you can sign up for the Treat Lyme book so you can read all those great articles. And the way to do that is click on any article you want to read. If you're not a subscriber, you will be asked to subscribe. I encourage you to do that, and I ask that you do that, because when you do that, you help support these free webinars, for instance, and you support a lot of the effort I do to help people that don't have other ways of getting help, okay? So join me in that. I would appreciate if you would do that. The other thing you can do when you go over to the Treat Lyme site is sign up for next week's webinar as well, too. All right. So thanks, everyone, for joining me tonight. I had a good time visiting with you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Good night, everyone.